The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as Camilla Parker Bowles stood at her bedroom window, watching the unusual activity below. Royal guards in their crisp uniforms moved with purpose around the estate grounds, their presence both familiar and unsettling. She had grown accustomed to security details over the years, but today felt different. There was an urgency in their movements, a tension that made her stomach tighten with worry. Camilla had inherited this beautiful countryside estate from her grandmother 20 years ago. The sprawling manor house, with its ivy-covered walls and ancient oak trees, had been her sanctuary through the most challenging times of her life. Every room held memories. Every corner whispered stories of family gatherings, quiet evenings by the fireplace, and peaceful mornings in the garden. The property wasn't just real estate to her. It was her emotional anchor, the place where she felt most like herself rather than the public figure the world knew. As she descended the grand staircase, her footsteps echoed in the unusually quiet hallway. Mrs. Henderson, her longtime housekeeper, appeared from the kitchen with worry etched across her weathered face. The elderly woman had worked for Camilla's family for over 30 years and knew every secret the house held. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached, clutching a formal-looking envelope that had arrived with the Dawn Courier. The letter bore the official royal seal, its weight heavier than paper and ink should allow. Camilla's fingers traced the embossed crest before breaking the wax seal, her heart racing with anticipation and dread. The formal language of the document was clear and devastating. Due to recent discoveries regarding the property's historical significance and potential royal artifacts, the estate was being placed under immediate crown jurisdiction, pending a thorough investigation. The words blurred before her eyes as she read about archaeological surveys, historical claims, and legal procedures she didn't fully understand. What struck her most was the phrase, "Immediate possession required," stamped in bold letters at the bottom. She had 48 hours to vacate the home that had sheltered her family for generations. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very institution she had become part of through marriage was now displacing her from her most cherished possession. Outside, more vehicles arrived, their engines humming ominously in the morning stillness. Archaeological experts emerged with equipment cases and surveying tools, while legal representatives carried thick folders of documentation. Camilla watched from behind the lace curtains as strangers prepared to dissect her home, searching for treasures she never knew existed. The gardens her grandmother had lovingly tended, the stables where she had learned to ride as a child, the library where she had spent countless hours reading, all of it was now beyond her control. The phone rang incessantly throughout the morning as news of the situation somehow leaked to the press. Camilla ignored the calls, instead walking slowly through each room, touching familiar objects and trying to memorize details she had taken for granted. The antique writing desk where she penned personal letters, the portrait of her great-grandfather in military uniform, the china cabinet filled with delicate pieces collected over decades. Each item now carried the weight of potential goodbye. Mrs. Henderson quietly began the heartbreaking task of packing personal belongings, her efficient movements betraying the emotion in her eyes. She had seen this family through births, deaths, celebrations, and sorrows, and now she was helping to dismantle the physical foundation of their shared history. The house seemed to sense the impending change, its old floorboards creaking mournfully, and its windows reflecting the gathering clouds that had begun to obscure the morning sun. As afternoon approached, Camilla found herself in the conservatory, surrounded by her beloved orchids and rare plants. This glass-walled sanctuary had been her escape during the most difficult periods of public scrutiny. Here, among the exotic blooms and gentle fountain sounds, she had found peace and strength. The thought of leaving these living things behind, of abandoning the careful cultivation that had taken years to perfect, brought tears she had been holding back all day. The garden beyond the conservatory stretched toward ancient woodlands that had stood for centuries before any royal claims or archaeological interests. Camilla remembered childhood adventures in those woods, family picnics by the old stone bridge, and quiet walks that had helped her through personal struggles. The land itself seemed to call out to her, reminding her of roots that ran deeper than any legal document or royal decree. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on her as evening shadows lengthened across the estate. She didn't know where she would go, how long this investigation would take, or whether she would ever be allowed to return home. The royal guards remained posted at the gates, professional but firm in their duty. Their presence transformed her sanctuary into something that felt more like a gilded prison. Beautiful but no longer truly hers, that night, as Camilla packed her most precious personal items into cases that seemed impossibly small. She wondered what secrets her family home might reveal. Her grandmother had been a woman of many stories, some shared and others taken to the grave. The possibility that royal treasures lay hidden within these familiar walls was both fascinating and terrifying. If such discoveries were made, would her home ever truly belong to her family again? Or would it become another piece of crown property, open to tourists and historians but closed to the woman who had called it home for 2 decades? The archaeological team arrived at dawn with equipment that transformed Camilla's peaceful estate into something resembling an excavation site. Dr. Margaret Thornfield, the lead historian, was a stern woman whose reputation for uncovering royal artifacts preceded her. She moved through the house with scientific precision, her trained eyes scanning walls, floors, and ceilings for signs of hidden compartments or structural anomalies that might conceal centuries-old secrets. Camilla had reluctantly agreed to stay for the first day of investigation, partly out of curiosity, and partly because she couldn't bear to leave without understanding what was happening to her home. She followed the team at a respectful distance, watching as they used strange devices that beeped and hummed against the manor's ancient walls. The house that had always felt warm and welcoming now buzzed with cold efficiency and scholarly excitement. The first significant discovery came in the library, a room Camilla had always considered her personal haven. Dr. Thornfield's metal detector had picked up unusual readings behind the massive bookshelf that housed first editions and family journals, spanning 3 centuries. When the team carefully moved the heavy wooden structure, they revealed a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped. The stone blocks were slightly different in color and texture, suggesting they had been added or modified long after the original construction. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly when the team began carefully removing the stones, her weathered hands pressed against her chest in shock. She had cleaned every inch of this library countless times over the decades, never suspecting that secrets lay hidden just beyond her reach. As each stone was numbered, photographed, and set aside with archaeological precision, a small chamber gradually emerged from behind the wall. The hidden space was no larger than a modern closet, but it contained treasures that made the entire archaeological team fall silent with awe. Wooden chests, their surfaces carved with royal symbols and protective seals, sat undisturbed in the darkness. The air that escaped the chamber carried the musty scent of centuries and the faint fragrance of long-dried lavender that someone had placed there as a natural preservative. Dr. Thornfield's hands trembled slightly as she illuminated the space with her powerful flashlight, revealing glints of gold and the rich colors of preserved fabrics. According to her preliminary assessment, the chamber appeared to date back to the English Civil War period, when many noble families had hidden their most precious possessions to protect them from parliamentary forces. The fact that these items had remained undiscovered for over 300 years was nothing short of miraculous. Camilla's mind raced as she tried to recall family stories that might explain this hidden treasure room. Her grandmother had often spoken of ancestors who lived through dangerous times, but she had never mentioned specific hiding places or royal connections. The family's oral history was filled with tales of loyalty to the crown during various conflicts, but Camilla had always assumed these were exaggerated stories meant to entertain children, rather than historical facts with material evidence. The first chest, when carefully opened under laboratory conditions in a makeshift clean room set up in the drawing room, revealed items that took everyone's breath away. Jeweled goblets bearing the royal coat of arms lay wrapped in silk that had somehow maintained its rich burgundy color despite the passage of centuries. Each piece was documented with photographs and detailed descriptions before being placed in protective containers for transport to royal preservation facilities. More stunning discoveries followed throughout the day. A second chest contained what appeared to be a crown or ceremonial headpiece, its precious stones still catching light despite centuries of darkness. Dr. Thornfield explained that preliminary examination suggested these might be backup royal regalia, created during times of political uncertainty, when the main crown jewels needed to be hidden or moved for safety. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of master jewelers who had access to the finest materials and royal patronage. The third and largest chest revealed documents that made the historians more excited than any of the material treasures. Rolls of parchment sealed with wax and ribbons contained what appeared to be correspondence between Camilla's ancestors and various members of the royal family throughout different historical periods. Some letters bore signatures that Dr. Thornfield recognized as belonging to long-dead monarchs, suggesting that Camilla's family had played more significant roles in royal affairs than anyone had realized. Among the papers was a detailed inventory, written in elegant 17th-century script, listing various royal artifacts that had been entrusted to the family for safekeeping during times of political upheaval. The document suggested that what they had found was only a portion of a larger collection, with additional hiding places located throughout the estate grounds. This revelation meant that the archaeological investigation would expand far beyond the house itself, to include the gardens, outbuildings, and even the ancient woodlands. As news of the discovery spread, more officials arrived at the estate. Representatives from museums, royal historians, and legal experts came to assess the significance of the find and determine the complex questions of ownership and preservation. The treasures clearly belonged to the crown by law, but the circumstances of their placement and the family's role as guardians created unprecedented legal and ethical questions. Camilla found herself in the surreal position of being displaced from her home due to treasures she never knew existed, while simultaneously being credited as the guardian of some of the most significant royal artifacts discovered in modern times. The media attention was overwhelming, with news crews gathering at the estate gates and helicopters circling overhead to capture aerial footage of the archaeological activity. By evening, the house felt completely foreign to her. Rooms were filled with equipment, protective barriers, and scientific instruments that hummed and clicked throughout the night. The familiar sounds of her home, the gentle settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through window frames, the distant hoot of owls in the garden, were drowned out by the noise of discovery and documentation. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a simple supper, but neither woman had much appetite. They sat in the kitchen, surrounded by packed boxes and the surreal knowledge that their quiet family home had been harboring secrets that would rewrite historical understanding of royal artifact preservation. The weight of responsibility and loss created an emotional complexity that neither woman was prepared to handle. That night, as Camilla tried to sleep in her childhood bedroom one last time, she could hear the security guards patrolling the grounds and the quiet conversations of researchers working late into the night. Her home had become a historical site of national significance, and she was no longer its owner, but merely a temporary guest in a place that was rapidly transforming into something entirely different from the peaceful sanctuary she had always known and loved. The second week of excavation brought discoveries that made international headlines and transformed Camilla's estate into one of the most significant archaeological sites in British history. Ground-penetrating radar had revealed extensive tunnel systems beneath the property, connecting the main house to the old chapel ruins and extending toward the ancient oak grove where Camilla had played as a child. The scope of the hidden network suggested that her ancestors had created an elaborate system for protecting royal treasures during multiple historical crises. Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a specialist in underground archaeology, arrived with a team equipped to safely explore the tunnel system. Their initial descent through a concealed entrance in the wine cellar revealed stone corridors that had been expertly constructed with proper ventilation and drainage systems. The engineering was sophisticated enough to suggest royal financing and master craftsmen, indicating that the hiding operation had been planned and executed with the highest levels of government approval. Camilla watched the live feed from the underground cameras with a mixture of fascination and heartbreak. These tunnels ran directly beneath her beloved rose garden, under the terrace where she had hosted countless summer parties, and beneath the very foundations of the life she had built. Every step the archaeological team took underground seemed to take her further away from ever reclaiming her home as a private residence. The tunnels led to multiple chambers, each one revealing artifacts that dated to different historical periods. The first chamber contained items from the English Civil War, including what appeared to be Charles III's personal prayer book and several pieces of jewelry that matched descriptions in royal inventories from the 1640s. The preservation was remarkable, with environmental conditions in the chambers having remained stable for centuries. A second chamber yielded treasures from the Jacobite period, including correspondence that suggested Camilla's ancestors had secretly supported various restoration attempts while publicly maintaining loyalty to the reigning monarchs. The political implications of these documents were staggering, potentially rewriting understood histories of several noble families' allegiances during one of England's most turbulent political periods. The most emotionally challenging discovery came in a third chamber that contained personal items belonging to various royal family members throughout the centuries. Children's toys, ladies' jewelry, men's ceremonial swords, and family portraits had been carefully stored with detailed notes explaining their provenance and significance. Reading these handwritten labels, many in her own ancestors' handwriting, Camilla began to understand that her family had served as secret guardians for royal personal effects during times when political circumstances made their public display dangerous. Among these personal items was a collection of letters that brought tears to Camilla's eyes. They were correspondence between royal mothers and their children, preserved during periods when families were separated by political exile or imprisonment. The human stories contained in these documents revealed the emotional cost of royal duty and the personal sacrifices made by families throughout British history. The discovery that affected Camilla most deeply was a small wooden box containing children's drawings and handmade gifts. The accompanying notes explained that these were created by royal children during periods when they were hidden away from court for their safety. Some of the artwork showed remarkable talent despite the young ages of their creators, while others were simply the innocent expressions of children missing their parents and normal family life. Dr. Thornfield explained that the emotional value of these personal collections often exceeded their monetary worth in terms of historical significance. They provided intimate glimpses into royal family life that had never been documented in official court records. The letters, in particular, revealed relationships, concerns, and daily experiences that humanized historical figures who had previously been known only through formal portraits and state documents. The media attention intensified as word of the personal discoveries spread. Royal historians from universities around the world requested access to the documents, while museums competed for the opportunity to display the artifacts. The estate grounds became increasingly crowded with researchers, security personnel, and media representatives, transforming Camilla's once peaceful home into something resembling a small city dedicated to historical investigation. Government officials arrived to discuss the complex legal and financial implications of the discoveries. The artifacts clearly belonged to the crown, but questions arose about compensation for the family that had unknowingly preserved them for centuries. Additionally, the estate itself might qualify for protected historical status, which would severely limit any future private use of the property. Camilla found herself caught between grief for her lost home and pride in her family's previously unknown service to the crown. The stories emerging from the archaeological investigation painted her ancestors as trusted guardians who had risked their own safety to preserve royal treasures during England's most dangerous political periods. Their loyalty and discretion had been so complete that they had never claimed credit or compensation for their service, passing down the responsibility through generations without even telling their own children the full extent of their duties. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an unexpected source of information during this period. Her own family had worked for Camilla's ancestors for several generations, and she began to remember stories her grandmother had told about special cleaning duties in certain parts of the house. These memories, combined with the physical evidence being uncovered, helped archaeologists identify additional hiding places that might otherwise have been missed. The most challenging emotional moment came when Camilla was asked to provide DNA samples to help authenticate some of the personal items found in the chambers. The possibility that she might be directly related to some of the royal family members whose possessions were hidden on her property added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. As the investigation entered its third week, the scope of discoveries had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations. The estate was now considered one of the most important archaeological sites in British history, with findings that would require years of study and analysis. For Camilla, this meant that any hope of returning to her quiet country life was fading with each new revelation. The house itself had been transformed into a research facility, with each room serving a specific scientific purpose. Her bedroom had become a document analysis laboratory, the drawing room housed artifact photography equipment, and the conservatory served as a climate-controlled storage area for the most delicate discoveries. The home that had once nurtured her spirit now hummed with the constant activity of historical research, its domestic warmth replaced by the cool efficiency of scientific investigation. Standing in what used to be her garden, now marked with excavation grids and measuring equipment, Camilla struggled to reconcile her personal loss with the historical significance of what was being revealed. Her family's secret legacy was finally being told, but the cost was the destruction of the quiet life she had built within the very walls that had protected these secrets for so many centuries. The fourth week brought the most shocking discovery yet, one that would forever change how Camilla understood her own identity and place in British history. Deep within the most secure underground chamber, archaeologists found a sealed lead container that required special equipment to open safely. When Dr. Thornfield finally accessed its contents in a sterile laboratory environment, she discovered documents that made her immediately contact the highest levels of government and royal administration. The container held a complete genealogical record, meticulously maintained across centuries, documenting marriages, births, and deaths within both royal and noble families. What made these records extraordinary was their inclusion of relationships that had never been officially acknowledged, including several marriages between royal family members and Camilla's direct ancestors that had been kept secret for political reasons. According to the documents, Camilla's great-great-grandmother had been secretly married to a younger son of King George III, a union that had been hidden because of political complications surrounding Catholic sympathies during a period of intense religious tension. The marriage had produced children who were raised with noble titles but without public acknowledgement of their royal blood, creating a hidden branch of the royal family tree that had existed in plain sight for over 2 centuries. The implications of this discovery were staggering for both Camilla personally and for the broader understanding of royal succession and bloodlines. Legal experts were immediately consulted to determine whether these secret marriages had any bearing on current inheritance laws or royal protocols. While the marriages predated modern succession acts and therefore had no impact on current royal authority, they did establish Camilla's family as legitimately connected to the royal bloodline through marriage rather than just service. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, the royal family's chief genealogist, arrived to verify the authenticity of the documents and cross-reference them with official royal records. Her preliminary analysis confirmed that the handwriting, paper, and ink all appeared genuine and consistent with the claimed time periods. More importantly, the documented events aligned with gaps and inconsistencies in official royal records that historians had never been able to explain satisfactorily. The emotional impact on Camilla was overwhelming. Learning that she had unknowingly been preserving not just royal treasures but also evidence of her own royal heritage created a complex mixture of pride, confusion, and grief. She began to understand why her grandmother had always spoken with such certainty about the family's loyalty to the crown and why certain family traditions had seemed unusually formal for their apparent social status. Mrs. Henderson's reaction was equally powerful. She revealed that her own grandmother had occasionally made cryptic comments about bloodlines and proper respect that had never made sense until now. The elderly housekeeper began to recall instances when her family had treated certain visiting relatives with unusual deference, suggesting that the secret of royal connections had been partially preserved through family behavior even when the specific knowledge had been lost. The genealogical records also explained the sophisticated nature of the treasure-hiding system on the estate. Rather than being simple loyalists asked to protect royal artifacts, Camilla's ancestors had been legitimate family members with both the right and responsibility to safeguard royal possessions during times of political upheaval. Their effectiveness as guardians had been enhanced by their apparent status as minor nobility, rather than recognized royalty, allowing them to operate without the scrutiny that surrounded more obvious royal family members. Additional documents found in the same container revealed the existence of similar guardian families throughout England and Scotland, suggesting a comprehensive network of secret royal family members who had served as protectors of royal interests for centuries. Each family had been given specific artifacts and documents to preserve, with detailed instructions for maintaining their safety across generations. The discovery prompted a complete reevaluation of several historical events. Certain military campaigns, political alliances, and noble marriages that had previously seemed random or opportunistic were revealed to have been carefully coordinated efforts to protect hidden royal family members and their responsibilities. The secret network had influenced British history in ways that traditional historians had never suspected. Government officials struggled with how to handle the public revelation of these discoveries. The existence of secret royal marriages and hidden family members could potentially undermine public confidence in the transparency and legitimacy of the current royal family, despite the fact that these historical secrets had no legal bearing on contemporary succession rights. Camilla found herself in the unprecedented position of being both a victim of property confiscation and a newly discovered member of the extended royal family. Legal experts debated whether her royal heritage created any claim to compensation or special consideration regarding her displaced status, while royal protocol specialists tried to determine what official recognition, if any, should be given to the genealogical discoveries. The media attention reached fever pitch as news of the royal bloodline discovery leaked to the press. Reporters and photographers surrounded the estate in even greater numbers, while genealogy experts and royal watchers offered endless commentary on the implications of the findings. Camilla's quiet country life had become impossible to maintain, regardless of whether she ever regained possession of her property. The archaeological team's work expanded to include searches for additional genealogical records and evidence of the secret royal family network. They began investigating other noble families mentioned in the documents, leading to discoveries at several estates across England that confirmed the existence of the hidden guardian system. Camilla's relationship with the investigation became increasingly complicated as she transitioned from displaced homeowner to collaborative participant in revealing her own family's hidden history. She found herself providing family memories and traditions that helped researchers understand how information and responsibilities had been passed down through generations, often in disguised forms that preserved essential knowledge while protecting those who carried it. The personal items found in the treasure chambers took on new meaning with the genealogical revelations. Children's toys and family portraits that had seemed historically interesting but personally distant were now understood to have belonged to Camilla's own relatives, separated by centuries but connected through bloodlines that had never been officially acknowledged. The weight of this new knowledge was emotionally exhausting. Camilla struggled with questions about identity and belonging that she had never faced before. Her entire understanding of her family's place in British society had been transformed overnight, replacing the comfortable certainty of minor nobility with the complex responsibilities and scrutiny that came with royal connections, even hidden ones. As the fourth week of investigation concluded, it became clear that the discoveries at Camilla's estate represented just the beginning of a much larger historical revelation. The secret royal family network and its treasure preservation system would require years of research to fully understand, and Camilla's home would likely remain a research facility for the foreseeable future, as the primary repository of evidence for this hidden chapter of British royal history. 2 months after the initial discovery, Camilla found herself living in a world she barely recognized. The small apartment she had rented in the nearby village felt cramped and impersonal compared to her sprawling family estate, but it was the only place she could find where the constant attention from media and researchers didn't penetrate every moment of her daily life. She woke each morning to newspaper headlines about the secret royal treasures and hidden bloodlines revealed, seeing her family's private history dissected and analyzed by strangers. The investigation had expanded far beyond her property to include several other estates across England, each one revealing additional pieces of the secret guardian network. Every new discovery seemed to validate the extraordinary nature of what had been found at Camilla's home, but it also meant that her personal displacement was becoming a permanent rather than temporary situation. The government had formally designated her estate as a site of national historical importance, making private residential use impossible for the foreseeable future. Dr. Thornfield visited Camilla regularly in her temporary accommodation, bringing updates on the research progress and seeking her input on family memories that might help interpret various discoveries. These meetings had evolved from purely professional consultations into something approaching friendship, as both women navigated the emotional complexity of revealing secrets that had been hidden for centuries. The most recent discovery had been perhaps the most personal and painful yet. Hidden in a sealed section of the tunnel system, archaeologists had found what appeared to be a private chapel where secret royal family members had been married and baptized throughout different historical periods. The chapel contained family records that documented births, deaths, and marriages within the hidden royal bloodline, including several that related directly to Camilla's immediate family. Among these records was documentation of her own parents' marriage, which had apparently been blessed in this secret chapel, according to traditions that her family had maintained without fully understanding their significance. The discovery meant that Camilla herself had been born into a lineage that combined both noble service and royal blood, making her one of the most directly connected individuals to the hidden royal family network. The genealogical experts had been working tirelessly to trace all the family connections documented in the various records found throughout the estate. Their research revealed that several prominent families throughout British history had been connected to the secret network, including some whose descendants continued to hold significant positions in government, military, and cultural institutions. Perhaps most remarkably, the investigation had uncovered evidence that the secret guardian system had continued to operate well into the 20th century, with certain families maintaining their protective responsibilities during both world wars and other periods of national crisis. Some royal artifacts had been moved and hidden during World War II, protected by families who understood their duties even when they no longer fully comprehended the historical significance of what they were preserving. Camilla learned that her own grandmother had been one of these modern guardians, having secretly maintained and preserved several important documents during the London Blitz. The elderly woman had never spoken directly about these responsibilities, but she had passed down specific traditions and careful behaviors that had ensured the continued protection of hidden royal materials without exposing them to discovery. These legal implications of all these discoveries continued to evolve as government lawyers struggled with unprecedented questions about property rights, royal prerogatives, and historical justice. While the artifacts clearly belonged to the crown under current law, the circumstances of their preservation and the family's unknowing sacrifices created moral obligations that had no clear legal precedent. Compensation discussions had begun, but they were complicated by the difficulty of putting a value on centuries of unpaid service and the loss of property that had become historically significant, partly because of that very service. Financial experts struggled to calculate appropriate recompense for families who had unknowingly donated their homes in privacy to preserve national treasures. The discoveries had also attracted international attention, with scholars from around the world requesting access to the materials for research purposes. The British Museum, the National Archives, and several universities had submitted proposals for long-term study and preservation programs that would ensure the materials remained accessible to researchers while maintaining their physical integrity. Camilla's role in these discussions was complex and emotionally draining. She found herself simultaneously advocating for her own interests as a displaced homeowner and serving as a representative for her ancestors' centuries of service. The weight of speaking for people who had deliberately chosen anonymity and secrecy felt overwhelming, especially when their sacrifices were being evaluated in terms of modern monetary compensation. The personal toll of the constant attention and decision-making had been significant. Camilla struggled with depression and anxiety as she tried to process not only the loss of her home, but also the complete revision of her understanding of her family's identity and historical role. The private person who had valued quiet country life found herself thrust into a public spotlight that seemed to grow brighter with each new discovery. Mrs. Henderson had chosen to remain working at the estate in a new capacity as historical consultant, helping researchers understand the daily operations and maintenance traditions that had unknowingly protected the hidden materials for decades. Her knowledge of family routines and household practices proved invaluable for understanding how the secret preservation system had functioned in practical terms. The media attention had evolved from sensational treasure hunting stories to more nuanced examinations of the ethical and historical implications of the discoveries. Some commentators praised the family's unwitting service to the nation, while others questioned whether the government's appropriation of private property was justified. Even under these extraordinary circumstances, Camilla began receiving letters from descendants of other guardian families who had recognized their own ancestors in the newly revealed documents. These connections created a community of people who shared the experience of discovering that their family histories were far more complex and significant than they had ever imagined. The emotional support from these newfound relatives helped Camilla cope with the isolation and uncertainty of her situation. They shared stories of family traditions that suddenly made sense, mysterious heirlooms that had new significance, and the challenge of reconciling private grief with public historical importance. As autumn arrived, Camilla faced the reality that her old life was permanently gone. The estate would never again be a private family home, and her identity would forever be intertwined with the historical discoveries that had emerged from her property. The question that haunted her daily was whether the historical significance of these revelations justified the personal cost to the families who had unknowingly preserved them across centuries of faithful Secret Service. 6 months after the initial confiscation, an unexpected invitation arrived that would change everything once again. The envelope bore the personal seal of the monarch, requesting Camilla's presence at Buckingham Palace for a private audience. The formal language of the invitation was warm and respectful, but it carried the weight of royal command that could not be refused. Even if Camilla had wanted to decline the meeting, preparing for the audience was emotionally overwhelming. Camilla had never imagined that her family's hidden service would lead to direct contact with the royal family she had unknowingly served for generations. The irony was not lost on her that she was being summoned to discuss treasures that had been hidden partly to protect them from the very institution that now wanted to honor her family's sacrifice. That the palace meeting took place in a private study rather than one of the formal reception rooms, creating an atmosphere of personal conversation rather than official ceremony. The monarch entered with minimal fanfare, accompanied only by a private secretary and Dr. Thornfield, who had become the primary liaison between the archaeological team and royal administration. The conversation began with expressions of gratitude for Camilla's family's centuries of faithful service, acknowledging that their sacrifices had been made without recognition or compensation. The monarch spoke personally about the emotional impact of reading the letters and documents that had been preserved, particularly those that revealed intimate family moments during some of the monarchy's most challenging historical periods. Most surprisingly, the monarch revealed that the royal family had retained some knowledge of the Guardian network. Though much of the specific information had been lost over time, certain traditions and protocols within the royal household had been maintained that were originally designed to support and communicate with the hidden Guardian families, but their original purposes had been forgotten as the network faded from active use. The conversation turned to the question of appropriate recognition for the Guardian families and their unprecedented service. Traditional honors and titles seemed inadequate for families who had unknowingly sacrificed their privacy and property to preserve royal heritage. The challenge was creating acknowledgement that matched the magnitude of their contribution while respecting their ancestors' deliberate choice of anonymity. The monarch proposed the creation of a new form of recognition specifically for the Guardian families, something that would honor their service without compromising the discretion that had made their protection effective. This would include financial compensation for their property loss, but also formal acknowledgement of their unique place in royal history and ongoing involvement in the preservation and interpretation of the discovered materials. Camilla was offered a position as chief consultant for the newly established Royal Heritage Preservation Foundation, which would oversee the continued research and protection of materials discovered through the Guardian Network investigation. The role would provide her with both meaningful work related to her family's legacy and financial security to replace what she had lost through the property confiscation. The position also came with the offer of a grace and favor residence within one of the royal estates, providing her with a home that acknowledged her family's service while allowing her to remain connected to the ongoing research and preservation work. The residence would be hers for life, with the understanding that her expertise and family knowledge were invaluable resources for understanding the discovered materials. Perhaps most meaningfully, The monarch proposed that Camilla's estate be transformed into a research center and museum dedicated to the Guardian network and the hidden royal treasures. Rather than simply appropriating the property for crown use, this approach would create a memorial to the families who had served in secret, with Camilla serving as the primary interpreter of their story and sacrifice. The museum concept would include recreation of family life at the estate, showing how ordinary domestic routines had unknowingly protected extraordinary historical treasures. Visitors would learn not just about royal artifacts, but about the dedication and loyalty of families who had maintained their responsibilities across centuries without seeking credit or recognition. Camilla's emotional response to these proposals was complex. The financial and practical solutions addressed her immediate needs, but they also represented a complete transformation of her identity, from private individual to public custodian of historical memory. She would never again be simply Camilla Parker Bowles living quietly in the countryside. She would forever be the Guardian family descendant, whose home had revealed one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in British history. The conversation also touched on the broader implications of the Guardian network, discoveries for understanding British royal history. The materials found at various estates were rewriting scholarly understanding of how the monarchy had survived various political crises, revealing sophisticated systems of protection and preservation that had operated largely outside official historical records. Academic institutions around the world were requesting access to the materials for research purposes, creating opportunities for Camilla to work with scholars who could help interpret her family's role in these larger historical patterns. The knowledge preserved by the Guardian families was proving invaluable for understanding not just what had been hidden, but why and how these preservation systems had been established and maintained. The monarch also revealed that similar Guardian families had been identified in other Commonwealth countries, suggesting that the network had been international in scope. Plans were being developed to coordinate research across multiple countries, potentially revealing an even more extensive system of royal heritage preservation than anyone had initially imagined. The meeting concluded with Camilla being given time to consider the various proposals, though it was clear that some form of ongoing involvement in the preservation and interpretation work was expected rather than optional. Her family's unique knowledge and her personal connection to the discovery site made her irreplaceable in efforts to understand and honor the Guardian network's historical significance. Returning to her temporary accommodation after the palace meeting, Camilla struggled with decisions that would determine the rest of her life. The proposals offered security and meaningful work, but they also meant accepting that her private life was permanently ended. She would spend her remaining years as a public figure, guardian of her family's secret legacy, and interpreter of a hidden chapter of British royal history. The weight of representing not just her own interests but also those of her ancestors who had chosen secrecy and service over recognition created an emotional burden that was difficult to bear. Every decision she made would affect how their sacrifices were remembered and whether their values of loyalty and discretion would be honored in the public revelation of their service. Mrs. Henderson's counsel proved invaluable during this decision-making period. The elderly housekeeper reminded Camilla that her ancestors had always chosen service over self-interest, and that accepting the proposed role would continue that tradition, while ensuring that their sacrifices were finally acknowledged and honored rather than forgotten. 1 year after the royal guards first arrived at her estate, Camilla stood in the grand entrance hall of what was now the Guardian Heritage Museum, watching the final preparations for the official opening ceremony. The house that had once been her private sanctuary had been transformed into a beautiful memorial to centuries of secret service, with each room telling part of the story of families who had protected royal treasures without seeking recognition or reward. The museum's centerpiece was the restored library where the first hidden chamber had been discovered. Visitors could view the original secret compartment through protective glass, while learning about the sophisticated preservation techniques that had kept royal artifacts safe for over 300 years. Interactive displays allowed people to understand how ordinary family life had concealed extraordinary historical responsibilities. Camilla's new role as chief heritage consultant had proven both challenging and rewarding. Working with historians, archaeologists, and museum designers, she had helped create exhibits that honored her ancestors' sacrifice while making their story accessible to the public. The work had given her a sense of purpose that helped offset the grief of losing her private life and family home. The grace and favor residence provided by the royal family was comfortable and dignified, located in a converted manor house on one of the royal estates. While it could never replace the emotional connection she had felt to her family's ancestral home, it offered security and proximity to the ongoing research work that had become central to her new life. The financial compensation package had been generous, acknowledging not only the property loss, but also the centuries of unpaid service her family had provided. More importantly, provisions had been made for the ongoing care of Mrs. Henderson and recognition of her family's parallel service as guardians of the Guardian family. The elderly housekeeper had chosen to continue working at the museum, serving as a living link to the traditions and knowledge that had preserved the treasures. The international dimension of the Guardian network had proven even more extensive than initially imagined. Similar discoveries at estates in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had revealed a Commonwealth-wide system of royal heritage preservation that had operated for over 2 centuries. Camilla had traveled to several of these sites, meeting other Guardian family descendants and helping to coordinate research efforts across multiple countries. These connections had created a unique community of people who shared the experience of discovering that their families had played hidden roles in preserving royal history. The relationships formed through this shared experience had helped Camilla cope with the isolation that came with her new public role and the loss of her former private life. The academic research generated by the discoveries continued to produce new insights into British and Commonwealth history. Scholars had used the preserved documents to reinterpret several major historical events, revealing the extent to which secret networks had influenced political and military decisions during times of national crisis. Camilla's family papers had become primary sources for understanding how information and resources had been moved and protected during various conflicts. The museum's education programs had become particularly meaningful to Camilla. School groups visited regularly to learn about loyalty, service, and the ways that ordinary families had contributed to preserving national heritage. Many young visitors were inspired by stories of people who had maintained their responsibilities across generations without expecting recognition, finding relevance in these historical examples of quiet dedication and faithfulness. The opening ceremony brought together members of the royal family, government officials, international scholars, and descendants of other Guardian families. The event marked not just the completion of the museum project, but also the formal recognition of a form of service that had never before been publicly acknowledged or understood. The monarch's speech during the ceremony emphasized the importance of recognizing different forms of patriotic service, acknowledging that some of the most significant contributions to national heritage had been made by people whose names would never appear in official histories. The Guardian families represented a tradition of service that valued duty over recognition and preservation over personal gain. Camilla's own remarks during the ceremony focused on the emotional complexity of seeing her family's private history become public heritage. She spoke about the challenge of balancing grief for her lost privacy with pride in her ancestors' previously unknown contributions to British history. The transformation of her personal loss into public gain had been difficult, but it had also revealed the extraordinary nature of ordinary family loyalty and dedication. The museum's success exceeded all expectations, with visitors from around the world coming to learn about the Guardian network and the hidden royal treasures. The story resonated with people because it revealed how historical preservation had depended not just on official institutions but on the quiet faithfulness of families who had maintained their responsibilities across centuries of changing circumstances. The ongoing research continued to produce new discoveries, with additional sites being investigated based on clues found in the original documents. Each new finding added to the understanding of how extensive and sophisticated the Guardian network had been, revealing a hidden infrastructure of royal heritage preservation that had operated parallel to official systems for centuries. As Camilla reflected on the year of transformation, she realized that while she had lost her private life and family home, she had gained something equally valuable: the knowledge that her family's service had been meaningful and that their sacrifices were finally being honored. The quiet loyalty that had characterized her ancestors' lives had been revealed as one of the most significant forms of patriotic service in British history. The evening after the opening ceremony, Camilla walked through the museum one final time before the public opening the next day. In the conservatory where she had once tended her orchids, new displays showed how even gardening routines had been designed to protect the hidden tunnel entrances. The transformation was complete. Her private sanctuary had become a public memorial to Secret Service. Standing in what had once been her bedroom, now housing documents that told her family's hidden story, Camilla felt a complex mixture of loss and fulfillment. The price of revealing these secrets had been the destruction of her former life, but the result was the preservation and honoring of a legacy that might otherwise have been lost forever. Her ancestors' choice of service over recognition had been vindicated, even as their anonymity had finally been surrendered to ensure their story would be remembered, and their sacrifice acknowledged for generations to come.